I should probably just let you do that.
Well, you know.
Okay, we're back. Had a good break. I appreciate everybody who was dancing during that break. That was fun. And we did have to turn the music off because, and hey, go ahead and put all the refreshments. If you're not coming to this here, you might want to consider it. It's pretty fun. Okay.
You might want
The
to.
refreshments were great.
The refreshments are great, the music was great, the dancing, just fun. But the break's over. So,
Hey Neil, Adela says all the Eisenhower boys were nicknamed Ike.
all the Eisenhower boys were, okay.
It was a sort of abbreviation of their last name. Dwight was Little Ike. His brothers grew out of the nickname, but Dwight kept it.
Okay. Tom just looked it up and said when he was at the United States Military Academy, the boys there called him Ike, and there's, I don't know, nicknames, you gotta be so careful with those.
Isn't it like in the mines?
Everybody in the mine had a nickname.
That's
Yeah.
all you know about.
Yep. In fact, I was talking to a friend of mine and he was talking about somebody and I said, well, who's that? Well, I don't know his real name, but I know what we called him in the mine. So that's what happened. And I'm not a fan of nicknames because when I was in 4th grade at Cottonwood Elementary, my last name was Peacock. And do you want to know what 4th graders do with that name? No, don't imagine, please.
Well, it'd be worse for Guy.
Jan knows, yeah.
It'd be worse for you.
So, well, here's how the election turned out. It was not close. Adlai Stevenson got buried. In the electoral vote, Ike got 442, or 83% of the electoral vote, to 17% for Stevenson. In the popular vote, 55% to 44%, which in today's world is a huge win. It's a big win, especially when we've had some pretty close elections recently. I think of George W. Bush and even Hillary Clinton election, and there have been some very close elections. Okay,
Whatever happened to Dewey?
Dewey continued to be a popular Midwest politician.
It just didn't. I mean, he almost won it before.
He almost won it, but you can see where the Democrat Stevenson won was that mostly solid South. And he still lost Florida, Tennessee, and Virginia. So the solid South had cracks in it even then. And Ike cleaned up. As soon as he's in power, he puts this man right here as Secretary of State, John Foster Dulles. And John Foster Dulles says, let's try something new. We're moving our armies all over the world, trying to contain communism. And obviously we can't. We lost China. We're in danger of losing other places. Maybe instead of containment, we should try something else. And John Foster Dulles suggests the idea of brinkmanship. Anybody care to speculate what that was? You lived through it, and I don't know how. So did I don't know how.
Just let everybody know.
It was the idea that if you were on the verge of nuclear war at all times, nobody would dare start it. If you were on the brink of war, nobody would dare do it.
We called it mutually assured destruction.
Right here, MAD, mutually assured destruction. It was compared to two men in an elevator holding pistols on each other. If you shoot the other man, his gun will go off and kill you.
So they made us grow up afraid? Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Absolutely scared to death. I don't know about you, but I was. And I tried to tell this to my high school kids. When I was 10, 11, 12, whatever, I knew how I was going to die. I had no doubt how I would die. And that would be in a nuclear war.
It was scary.
Go ahead, Jim.
We were gonna go up to the church mine to be safe.
That was the place. Or if you were in Huntington, Huntington was at the old North Emory High School building down the basement. If you lived with me out at Lehman Caves was a fallout shelter you went to. Down to Farron, South Emory was a fallout shelter, and you were trained. And yeah, the church mine, or the Deseret mine as it became, that's where you were headed if you were here.
Remember
So
that
they
little,
like to use fear now, it's the climate, all the kids are afraid they're gonna die from climate change.
As long as they know what they're going to die of, that's what I say.
And Real Canyon, the canyon.
Real was? Okay.
There was I went in there, and here's these big buckets full of phenobarbital and body bags and soda crackers.
There you go.
But you know, and I'm speaking up here for a whole generation, but the 60s, everybody thought we were so terrible, you know, I'm so proud to be a boomer. We brought attention to a lot of things, and one of them was, you know, there's gotta be a better way than just blowing the whole earth to
Okay.
pieces.
Jan brings this up, that youth in the 60s began to rebel from this idea of mutually assured destruction. And you started getting sayings like, what if we held a war and nobody came? Stuff like that. But do you want to debate me, really? When was that nuclear war we had? What was the date when we had that massive nuclear war where the world ended?
It's because of
Supposed
the,
to have been 1984.
because of the.
Yeah, it was that close for sure.
That was because the boomers protested.
Was that what did it?
Yeah, we didn't have to have it then.
In Russia, there weren't any boomers protesting. Nobody was protesting.
No, they weren't.
It worked. You can argue that it was dumb, it was stupid, it was scary and dangerous,
Nobody was gonna.
but it worked. We didn't have a nuclear war. Now, you can have your own opinion on this, please do.
Yeah.
But as I look at it, it seems mad.
Yeah.
But still, it was scary enough that even Russia didn't want to try it. We
About
can,
remember
now.
those little symbols?
what about now?
It's still.
Oh my gosh, now we don't hardly know how it's all going to happen. And as pointed out, our young people are afraid of other things.
COVID.
Yeah,
COVID,
they should.
the environment crashing and on and on and on. And back then we knew who the enemy was. That was Russia. China was the enemy, but they were annoying.
They
I think the
protected
most dangerous
themselves.
country right now in the world is China.
I think we are
And-
underestimating
and-
them a lot.
Anyway, we turned to MAD as our policy, and it was cheap.
Oh, yeah.
It was cheaper than armies. And we won't talk about this for a little while, but when Eisenhower leaves, he gives a speech about the military-industrial complex, where he says, we have let the arms industry and the military run this country, and it needs to stop. But he was out by then. He was going. He was telling us, giving us advice, don't let them run the country. But he had turned to nuclear weapons as a cheaper alternative to big, huge standing armies with massive amounts of weapons.
Well, yeah, it did work, unless you get a crazy person in the White House or in Russia or.
Now, I want to tell you, Eisenhower did go to Korea after he won, before he was president. Between the time he was elected and before he was inaugurated, he went to Korea. He ate dinner with soldiers there. He talked with them. He then gave a few speeches. And here's what he said to the Chinese and the North Koreans. I don't want to use atomic bombs, but you don't have them, and we do. And if I have to, I will use atomic bombs on you. And I'm not asking you to surrender or give up land. I'm asking you to come to the peace talks. Well, they came to the peace talks and they argued for, how long was it? 6 months on what shape the table should be. Seriously.
It's a fake thing.
They were just intransigent. They would not move. They were not going to, and Eisenhower is seriously threatening them with nuclear destruction if we don't have peace talks. And then the thing that needed to happen happened. And that is on March 5th, 1953, Joseph Stalin died. And I'm a terrible person, and I think you already know that. You know I'm a terrible person. You know I'm a terrible person. Nothing delights me more than how Stalin died. He may have killed 40 million of his own people during his lifetime, counting what he did in World War II and what he did in his purges before the war and after the war. And he declared war on his farmers of his nation and starved millions to death. He was evil. And so one day he was in his office and he walked into a boardroom, kind of like where we're here now, and he collapsed. And somebody, nobody would admit to it, picked him up and laid him on the table. He had had a major stroke, and he was in horrible, horrible pain, and he was screaming and crying for help. Somebody help me. Somebody help me. And everybody in and around his office left. Because there's only one thing more dangerous than trying to kill Stalin. Trying to help him. He would get even with you. And he suffered there for hours before somebody listened in and he wasn't screaming anymore. And they went in and checked him and he was dead. Now, when Lenin had died, also of a stroke,
Really?
yes, they took Lenin and they built a chamber in the Kremlin wall. And real thick glass lined chamber, and they embalmed Lenin like to the gills. I mean, he's 90% wax. Anyway, they just embalmed the heck out of him, and they laid him in a coffin, and people could come by in the Kremlin, not outside, they had to come in the Kremlin, and you could walk by there and you could look at Lenin.
Is that in there?
This is Lenin back here laying there.
He looks like.
I just need to tell you this. What is the number one tourist attraction in Russia today? And it costs you $35. Lenin's tomb. Getting to go by and look in and see Lenin laying there.
Seriously?
Seriously. You wouldn't pay it? When you're in Russia, I'm willing to bet when you're in Russia and everybody on the bus says, oh, let's go see Lenin.
I'd say I'm going shopping.
It's only $35. Well, they decided that the only appropriate thing to do with this man who had ruled Russia lots longer than Lenin had, 4 times longer than Lenin had, the only appropriate thing was to put him in a coffin with Lenin in that same place. So then you could go by, and this is it to prove it. This is Stalin and Lenin laying there in the tomb, and you could go by and look at him. And when he died, a new man arrives that you know.
Yeah.
Nikita Khrushchev. And Nikita Khrushchev, first, it took him a couple years to consolidate power. He had to get control of everything, and he did. And then he turned around and declared that Stalin was a war criminal. And that Stalin's policies were criminal. His purges, the way he fought wars, all of that, he was a war criminal. And Stalin's body was taken out of there. And back then, the NKVD, the secret police of Russia, took him outside the Kremlin wall, dug a hole somewhere there, and he's buried somewhere outside the Kremlin wall without a marker or anything to indicate where he is.
Good.
Because he was evil, said Nikita Khrushchev. And Nikita Khrushchev declared a new era of openness. Is that how any of you remember Nikita Khrushchev? No. With his shoe at the UN. Yeah, and we'll talk about that. But by the mid-50s, Nikita Khrushchev is saying Russia is going to open up. Russia is going to open up, and we're going to be more open in what we do. And he would rule until 64. So he will come in 53 and rule 11 years, and then he'll quietly be sent into retirement so that his second in command, Brezhnev, can take over, who said, no, Khrushchev was a war criminal. Stalin was a great guy. We need to be more like Stalin. We'll talk about Brezhnev when we get there. Okay, with the death of Stalin, the Koreans and the Chinese go, okay, we can have peace now. And we come to learn the main reason they were fighting the Korean War, continuing it, is because Stalin insisted on it. And as soon as he was dead, they came to the peace talks, and we ended the fighting. That's all I want to say. We didn't end the war. The war is still ongoing. But we ended the fighting. An armistice, a ceasefire. That's what we have. And we have a DMZ, a demilitarized zone, there on the border of South Korea and North Korea.
Oh, and it's still there.
It's still there. We are technically still fighting against the North Koreans, and they're fighting against us. We don't take it as seriously as the North Koreans do. They raise their kids knowing that they're at war with us. But there's no shooting. And as I said before, there's a place you can go there if you have the permission, and you can walk into a room that is divided by the 38th parallel, and you can walk over and you walk around the table and then walk out, and you've been in North Korea this far. So, and our son has been to North Korea that far. But North Korea still takes it very serious. We do to this point. If you're going to have a career in the Army, if you're going to make it a 20-year career in the Army, you will spend at least a year in South Korea, because we still have a very major force there.
Well, and they have kind of a madman. What's his name?
In North Korea, Kim Jong-un.
Jong-un. He's still the leader, isn't he?
As far as we know, it's hard to get information out of Korea, but we think so.
He's pretty crazy.
So here it is. Here they are negotiating. Korea armistice signed. Hostilities ceased today. It was a great day for people who were my dad's age. My dad didn't. Gwen's dad was in World War II. My dad was in the Korean War. And what a great day for people when that ended. And it's sometimes called the Forgotten War, partly because people kind of just wanted to forget it. A lot of people did. But I'm glad we now honor those men and women who fought in that. Then a great thing that happens. We took the Office of Strategic Services that we had in World War II, which was our spies and our information gathering organization, and we changed them and we called them the Central Intelligence Agency. And their stated purpose was to gather information on threats to the United States. And by 1953, they've kind of gone beyond that. And so, this is Eisenhower meeting with Mohammad Reza Pahlavi, the Shah of Iran. And he had been overthrown by the Iranian people who had set up a democratic republic. So the Shah is another name of saying the king. They had set up a elected constitutional democratic republic. Now, maybe they didn't always vote the way we wanted them to, but they voted in Iran. And the British and the U.S. said, we can't let that go. And so the Iranian, the army talked the Iranian army into overthrowing the government and said, we'll back you up with money and intelligence and we'll help you overthrow this man, the Prime Minister, Mohammad Mossadegh, in favor of strengthening the monarchical rule of the Shah. They took the Shah from a name-only king and they made him the official dictator of Iran.
And the US helped him do that?
We made it happen.
Why?
Because he was friendly to us.
He was friendly to us. He would support us. Where, how do you know what those elected officials are ever going to do?
And you can trust the kings so much.
So in the United States, our CIA called it Operation Ajax. In the United Kingdom, MI6 called it Operation Boot. And we joined together with money and intelligence, and we got the army to overthrow the democratically elected government of Iran and said to the Shah, you're not just a name-only kind of guy now. You are the dictator of Iran. And he quickly organized his secret police and used them to try to root out people who wanted to go back to democracy.
That seems just
Oops.
insane to me.
Oops. Just saying, if you think we did wrong, don't worry. It's going to come back and bite us.
Oh, yeah.
Okay. You remember, I love this picture. Here's an attorney for the army. He's like, wow, this guy lies. He says things and has no proof, and on and on and on. This becomes known as the Army McCarthy hearings. And McCarthy is excited because they're going to be televised. They're going to be on TV. And so the whole nation gets to watch McCarthy grill the army. And one of the army attorneys, I don't think it was this one. I've watched the footage of it. One of the attorneys comes out and says, Mr. McCarthy, your accusations caused a young soldier to kill himself. And those accusations weren't true. And McCarthy started to bluster like he does, and the attorney for the army kept his cool. And McCarthy was blubbering, and he said, no, you caused an American soldier's death by his own hand, by your accusations. And McCarthy looks at Roy Cohn and says, what do we do? And he sweats. And as people watch him on TV, when they read McCarthy, they said, oh, he's okay, he's got some good ideas. But when they saw him on TV, the nation turned against him. And the number one man to turn against him was the President of the United States, Eisenhower, who was just waiting for such a chance.
Okay.
And he came down on McCarthy with both feet in speeches and in letters he wrote. And the Senate called this discredited man before them, and they censured one of their own senators. They were no longer afraid of him. The army had pulled back the curtain, and the wizard was just a man. And now they all came at him like piranha after a bleeding cow. And he was still senator, but he would be until 58, but he dies before that of alcoholism. And that's the end of Joe McCarthy, Tail Gunner Joe. Highly discredited. Roy Cohn and others went on to try to do other things too, but that's the end of McCarthy and McCarthyism. And since then, McCarthyism has come to mean accusing people without proof. Accusing people without any proof, mostly for your publicity.
So
Yeah.
he was a liar, and
He was a liar.
Was the alcoholism something he had all along? That's what-
He had developed a lot of drinking when he had been in the army, but that had grown worse. He, in his 40s, he had married a younger woman and had a child, and that didn't stop his alcoholism. And he was never assigned. He was censured, and nobody would put him on a committee. Nobody wanted to hear him speak in the Senate. Nobody invited him to go out and speak at ladies' gardening clubs or in Salt Lake or anywhere. And he just kind of was serving out his time in the Senate and died before it was over. In 1954, we proved that we had pretty good scientists when we launched the USS Nautilus, the first nuclear-powered submarine. And now many of our ships are nuclear-powered. Especially, we have 8 nuclear-powered aircraft carriers, something like that, I believe. Nuclear power is driving our Navy, and starting in 1954, we had nuclear-powered submarines.
I got to go in one in Bremerton.
In Bremerton?
When we visited up there, it was just fascinating. It was huge. So, I mean, it was still claustrophobic, but it was, it was.
It's kind of a big sort of
It was in
claustrophobia.
dry dock, so at least it wasn't under the water.
Okay, one of the great decisions, and we'll probably end with this, happens in 1954 when that same guy that did it before with Sweat versus Painter, Thurgood Marshall, sues all the way to the Supreme Court for a little girl named Linda Brown. And here she is. Here's Linda Brown. She moved into Topeka, Kansas, and went to school, and the school board of Topeka, Kansas said, you can't come in here. This is a whites-only school. And her dad said, well, we'll see about that. And they sued through the state courts, and they got it to the Supreme Court. And Thurgood Marshall, once again, without a doubt, maybe the man, John Adams might be the other one, but Thurgood Marshall was the most prepared person I think that's ever appeared before the Supreme Court. Prepared in everything. He was smart, but he also worked hard at it. And the Supreme Court voted in a unanimous decision that separate is not equal. And it never is, and it never will be. And that all schools and facilities needed to be desegregated.
Now this is 54.
54. And this is a Florida school. This little girl was the first black girl to ever attend that school. What do you think?
Well, Neil was somewhat of a precedent for that because President Truman had integrated the military.
That's absolutely correct.
Too, wasn't it?
Yeah, during the Korean War, he integrated the military, and he cashiered any officers who said, well, I'm not having blacks in my unit. And he got rid of them. And he took it seriously. And so that's a huge step towards this. And then Painter versus Sweat was another step, but this is the big step. And here it says, High Court bans segregation in public schools.
But that didn't end it.
No, the South said,
No way.
we can do whatever we want. Supreme Court can't tell us what to do.
Wallace comes into the picture.
And others. We'll talk about them. But the law of the land is schools had to be desegregated. Actual desegregation was going to take a long time. Julie, when you were in the South, weren't there still vestiges of segregation hanging around?
I had no clue that there was anything wrong. I mean, I was oblivious. We didn't have anything like that. Then I taught in an all-black school. There were 2 white teachers, me and 1 more. But one time, I could get out in the sun and I could tan real well and naturally curly hair. He thought I was one of them. White students. They came in all colors. I was darker than some of them. Yeah. Anyway.
When my dad was in New Mexico, he was in Arizona, New Mexico, and Texas serving a LDS mission, and he was transferred from New Mexico to Texas. So he got on the bus, I think, at Albuquerque, and they were driving, and there were black, white, Hispanic, everybody sitting together. And when the bus driver got to the Texas border, he stopped the bus and he said, "Okay, you know what you have to do." My dad didn't know what he had to do. He was raised in Utah. He was raised in Price. And
Mountains in Columbus.
Uh-huh.
And the top one was for the whites, and then there was another one for the blacks, and then the bottom was for your animals.
there you go. And that's well after this decision.
So they made the black people just hurry and move to the back of the bus? when
They said, "You know what you have to
landed in
do,"
Texas?
and Dad didn't know, but he tried to follow what was going on, and the black people got up and moved to the back of the bus, and the white people moved to the front of the bus. Dad didn't move, and a black lady came and said, "Get the blank out of my seat." And so Dad moved, and she took that seat, but
You know, when I was a youngster, I don't remember, it was in the early 50s. And my cousin, though, I was talking to her a couple of years ago, and she said that she remembers going to a school between Fruita and Grand Junction.
okay.
It was a little country school out there, and she was like in first or second grade. But there was Highway 6 went right by the school. There was an accident of a black family that was hurt in this car wreck, and at that time, they had to take the black family somewhere else to go to the hospital to get themselves checked, and because there was no support, and they wouldn't allow them in the town of Fruita, Colorado, which, you know, back then it was like, but now it's just, why? I mean, it's just horrible.
It makes no sense.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, this is when it starts to make sense again. 1954, Thurgood Marshall. Got to say, he spent more time in front of the Supreme Court than I think any other man. And then later on, he's appointed to the Supreme Court. And he will serve as one of the really great jurists of our time on that Supreme Court, making decisions not based on politics, but based on right and wrong.
Was he the first black?
First black to become a member of the Supreme Court. Okay, look at this. We're going to get you done in time. A preview of next week. We're going to talk about French Indochina, and we're going to talk about the Warsaw Pact and the murder of Emmett Till and Rosa Parks. Okay?
At our school, we always showed the kids the movie of Ruby Bridges, who was